Julie, we've got everybody. If you want to do a last announcement or anything, I can get started.
Wonderful. So we'd like to welcome all of you to Do You Deliver? How COVID-19 is impacting the global supply chain and creating new careers. We have exciting panelists here today to be able to speak to and have great expertise here about this area. If you could, as you're joining, make sure that your camera, your webcams are turned off for students, and also mute your mic. And feel free, if you have questions along the way, you can go ahead and place them in the chat. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy.
Thank you so much. Thanks to CSCC Career Services for doing all the planning and the hosting for this. This was an idea that we kind of hatched about a month ago after an IT program similar. So thank you to them, and also thank you to the CSCC Grants Department for all the behind the scenes work they do. It makes this look easy, makes me look good. So thank you all. For those that don't know me, I'm Jeremy Banta. I'm an assistant professor and program coordinator for the supply chain management program at Columbus State. I've been with Columbus State for 4 years. Prior to that, I spent 30 years in the supply chain industry, 15 in the civilian sector. I got a degree from Ohio State in logistics and went to work. And then the last 15 years, full-time with the Ohio Army National Guard, doing logistics with them. Even as a young boy, I was well organized and planful, and inadvertently made a lifelong career out of it. So having discussions like this one today, to me at least, is invigorating and exciting, and I'll do my best to make it that way for you as well. Our topic today is about the impact of COVID-19 on the global supply chain. As someone that's been in the logistics industry my entire life, I've had to explain the term supply chain management on many occasions, as I'm sure our guests have as well. And now we're seeing it in the news almost daily. And while I hesitate to say it's a good thing, it is bringing a lot of attention to our industry. So I would believe many have a general idea of what supply chain is, but maybe not fully why COVID-19 has been such a global disruption. So that's why we're here today. One of the things we've all seen that's changed is entertainment. Our news has changed. The interview shows that we watch have transitioned to a virtual format, and that kind of inspired me. So normally this would be a panel discussion, but today I'm going to kind of do it kind of like a podcast, or like what we've been seeing on the news, and talk to my guests a little extended for each of them, and then bring everybody back together at the end. So before we start, I would like to say we'll do our best to take questions from the audience. Feel free to put them in the chat. There's a couple of us that will be monitoring those. We'll see if we can get to them as we go, and if not, we'll look at them, and if we have time at the end, we'll talk to those. So my first guest I would like to introduce is my friend Dr. Terry Esper, Associate Professor of Logistics at The Ohio State University, Fisher College of Business. Terry and I started at OSU about the same time, or started me at Columbus State and him at Ohio State. We share an affinity for certain beverages and are both fans of the bow tie, even though neither of us are wearing one today. So let's do a quick definition so we're all on the same page. Terry, can you define supply chain management and logistics and kind of describe the two terms and what the subtle differences are?
Yes. Thank you so much, Jeremy. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to be a part of this conversation. And I look forward to a lot of great insights. And I look forward to learning as well as sharing my thoughts. So, Jeremy, I think that's a great place to start, right? Supply chain versus logistics. We hear a lot at times those terms being used interchangeably in many ways, and in some cases even confusing one for the other, and vice versa. So first of all, I always like to suggest that supply chain is broader than logistics. I think that's a great place to start. That supply chain in many ways encompasses logistics, in the sense that logistics is a part of supply chain management. So when we think supply chain management, I like to suggest that it is, essentially all of the processes that are necessary in order to get products to the shelf that you and I use, purchase, and buy and consume in order to live our daily lives. Hey, Got someone hanging out with us. But when we think of all the products that we buy on a day-to-day basis, there's a series of processes that were involved in order to get those products to that shelf, and they involved processes of such as manufacturing, which is of course producing those products. But then there are the logistics processes, or the processes to get those products to the market through transportation and warehousing and inventory management and et cetera. There are the procurement processes, which are the processes of getting all the materials that are needed in order for those products to be manufactured. So generally speaking, when we talk about supply chain management, we're talking about a lot of processes across several different companies in order to get the products that we need to the market, right? Logistics is one of those sub processes, if you will, and that is the process of moving and storing those goods. So this is where transportation and inventory management and warehousing, et cetera, fall in. So from a definitional perspective, hopefully that kind of clarifies a little bit that supply chain is more all-encompassing, including several processes. Logistics is one of those processes underneath the supply chain umbrella.
Yep, almost identical to what we teach in class.
Perfect.
So why is it in the news so much right now? Why are we hearing it almost daily?
Because of toilet paper and Clorox wipes and more increasingly patio furniture. I mean, when we think about it, right? So, that's an interesting question, because one of the things that has been so interesting about working in supply chain is that more often than not, people don't know what we do until something goes wrong, right? So until those supply chains don't work. So if you think about supply chains as this integration of companies and processes to get products to the market, well, if there are hiccups or interruptions in those processes, then those products don't get to the marketplace. And this is what we saw with the conversations around toilet paper and Clorox wipes and Lysol spray, all the products that have become quite popular during the pandemic. And the reason why they became so popular is because those products were not on shelves. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we have seen this increase of focus on supply chain management, is because companies like Kroger and companies like Target and Walmart have had to talk about their supply chains, because consumers want to know, when can I expect more product on the shelf? And so that is inevitably asking, what's up with your supply chains, and when is your supply chain going to get more product to the shelf? Even though we ask the question, when can I expect more product? The true question that we're asking there is, how much longer does it take for that product to get through your supply chain? And so I think that's why we're seeing supply chain become so much more popular, particularly in light of COVID-19.
Yeah, I knew we kind of made it on the map when the lieutenant governor, like in the first month, was talking about how the supply chain goes into government relations and how communication comes down to the individual. So an unfortunately proud moment, but a proud moment to see it, being talked about so much. So how does this tie into what you do at Ohio State?
Yeah, great question. So, as a professor in supply chain, and particularly in logistics, my role is to not only teach our students that enroll in our programming at Ohio State, but also to engage in research and to engage in outreach. So I've spent my time since the pandemic, for example. I spent quite a bit of time doing things like this, talking about what's going on within the industry. As a part of the industry and teaching these topics to college students, I have to stay abreast of what's going on. I have to stay relevant. So these conversations and monitoring what's going on with COVID-19 have been really a part of my job, in order to ensure that I know what I'm talking about when I get on a webinar like this, or at least have some idea that I think I know what I'm talking about, right? But secondly, that when I get in front of students, I'm able to teach them the topics that are relevant, current, and happening today, and are fresh. So, everything that's been happening since supply chain has now hit the big stage, particularly as a function of COVID-19, have been quite impactful to my day-to-day work as I get up every day and read all the headlines and try to stay abreast of everything that's happening in order to be able to stay fresh with my content.
So I know one of the things that you research and that people have you come talk about a lot is last mile.
Yeah.
Can you do a quick definition of what last mile is and why it's such a big deal now in general?
Yeah. So when we think of logistics, as we talked about, supply chain is the umbrella, right? Within supply chain, underneath that, you've got logistics, and logistics involves, from getting corn and wheat from farms all the way through to getting finished product to a shelf, right? But more often than not, we have been putting a lot of emphasis on online retail, where consumers are saying, instead of me driving to a store to buy that to buy that product from a shelf, I'm going to purchase it online, and I like you, Mr. or Miss Retailer, that product to my home. And that is generally what we refer to as the last mile of logistics, getting that product from retail to the home of the consumer that'll use it. And generally, in a traditional sense, we were required to execute our own last mile logistics by shopping in stores and taking that product home. But now that we've seen the growth and the emphasis on online retail, more often than not, the last mile of logistics is being handled by retail firms like Amazon, for example. And so if you think about that last mile of logistics, it's very expensive. So one of the interesting concepts when you think of last mile is of all the logistics costs across the entire supply chain, last mile makes up about 53% of those logistics costs. And the reason why it is so expensive to do last mile logistics is because you're shipping hey, I've got one right here. You're shipping a small box like this, right, to one home. As opposed to, if you think about trucks where you have, hundreds and thousands of packages that are in 53-foot trailers, you're getting so much more economies of scale for those shipments. Whereas with last mile, you're shipping one package to one address, and that address could be, for example, in my case, I live downtown Columbus, so you would have to kind of block off High Street to try to get to where I live. Or if you are in a community where there's a cul-de-sac and you have to navigate through streets in order to get to your home, when you think about all of those aspects, it really does make last mile logistics quite expensive. The reason why it's become so popular, of course, is because we are shopping online more than ever before. And when we think about COVID-19, that has truly led us to shop online. I can honestly say that I shop online a little bit, but I still like the traditional model. But during the pandemic, I really increased the extent to which I shop online. And I think most of us has. And so now more than ever, last mile logistics has become just a part of our day-to-day life. And so there are a lot of interesting dynamics in that last mile space. And it's one of the reasons why I stay pretty connected to what's going on, because it's one of those really interesting areas where logistics comes all the way to my front door. And really learning a lot more about what's happening there.
Yeah, working from home now, right there is the front of my house. I live downtown too, and I'm now noticing, I'm in the industry, and I now notice how many times there's a delivery vehicle out front of my house. I mean, it's 10, 15 times a day sometimes, between FedEx and UPS, Amazon employees, people delivering food, USPS. Them coming maybe twice a day, once for packages, once for mail. Yeah, it's amazing how much that's increased with everybody
and
staying home.
And Jeremy, when you think about DoorDash and Postmates, they're crowdsourcing last mile models that are out there. So it's not even the Amazon trucks and the FedEx drivers. I mean, those are the big brands, but there are a lot of people driving regular cars and regular clothes that are doing a lot of essential delivery work. And it has become a way of even making a living wage and being introduced to the community and to the field through that delivery space. So a lot of really interesting dynamics going on there. Yeah.
And you bring that up, and it ties right into my next question. There's a great video of you doing a TEDx talk
wow.
where you connect yourself to your research, So can you real quickly get into how you got into logistics and
Yeah.
your personal ties into the industry?
Oh wow, that's thank you, Jeremy, for that question. That's such a humbling thank you. I'm humbled by that. So interestingly enough, my very first job was as a paper boy. So I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and I delivered papers for the Detroit News, which was one of the major newspapers in the city. And so very early on, I was involved in some way, getting a product to the home of consumers. And so that's kind of where I learned a lot about routing. I basically rerouted my whole paper route. They give you your route and tell you what to do. And I'm like, no, that don't make sense to me. Like, I think if I leave my wagon here and run up the back, I can get it done a lot quicker. So what was funny about that, now that I think about it in retrospect, was that I was kind of doing, routing and efficiency modeling. I mean, I was doing logistics, even though at that time I was just maybe 14 or 15 years old. So that's kind of how I started showing at least some degree of interest in this notion of distribution and logistics. But over the years, I got into the industry. I worked for companies. I worked for the government sector. And a couple of years ago, I was reading a really interesting article, because I will say that I got to a point where I thought the work was interesting, but I sit with colleagues that do work that they see as an immediate connection to who they are personally. So I've got friends who teach marketing, and they teach ethnic marketing, and they might be Latina. And so it just, their work is so much about who they are. And I'm like, yeah, I'm the logistics guy. Like, I don't know that that has anything to do with me, but it's just a cool topic that I really enjoy. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago when I learned that this home delivery model and this last mile logistics that we're talking about, it has just been so powerful over the years, some of what it has done. So when we think about logistics and home delivery, we talk about it as online shopping, but really think about some communities where they may live in what we call food deserts.
Hmm.
Well, where access to healthy food is very difficult, and if you don't have access to reliable transportation, then it's even more difficult to get access to healthy food. However, with online logistics, I mean, with online retail and last mile logistics capabilities, you have the ability to provide access to to products that they may not have been able to get in their local communities. And so now we start to talk about more of that logistics is about more than just getting a package to the door, but it's more about what's in this package, right? This package, what's in here could be something that could be life-saving for me. Not to mention that what's in this package could be something that I may not have had access to in my day-to-day life, because my community where I live doesn't have a real great retail infrastructure. So now last mile logistics is about access, and it's about equity and fairness. And so there's a lot more when we really think about logistics. And the one story that was interesting to me from a few years ago is when Sears declared bankruptcy, and there were a lot of conversations about the history of Sears. And one story I stumbled upon, there was a professor, I think at Cornell, that had brought some visibility to how Sears and their home delivery services way back in the 50s and 40s, 50s, and 60s, that was the way that African Americans in this country could shop and not have to go into retail stores and be subjected to racism and discrimination. So, 2020, we're having these conversations now about how racial biases are still playing out. But when we think that it was a logistics process that was possible for someone like my grandmother to shop and not have to go into a retail store and maybe see a sign that says, you can't come through this door, you have to go through that door because of the color of your skin, or maybe a sign that says you can't even shop here because we only serve whites, but they could shop on a Sears catalog and get those products delivered to their homes where they didn't have to deal with that racism and discrimination. So now this package, interestingly enough, being shipped to your door is not so much about what's in it, but it's also the dignity that I get from getting this package to my door. So for me, I think logistics is one of those topics that, even though it is very much so about getting things to where they need to be, but there are so many more layers to it when we really think about the power of the work that we do in logistics. So that's my story. Thank you for asking that question. I really do appreciate that opportunity.
Yeah, it's that's fascinating. One, from a standpoint of just yourself and being able to finally make that connection, to make what you're doing even more inspirational to yourself. But two, finding something that you do, that you enjoy, that you may not even realize it, and being able to make a career out of it. Oddly, everything being one big circle. My very first job was at Sears. And I got yelled at because I didn't have anything to do, and I was sitting talking to some people, and my boss said, "I don't care if you don't have anything to do, look busy." And I ended up like organizing the entire back stock warehouse area just out of sheer boredom. So yeah, it's kind of nice.
I used to work at Sears, actually. I used to work at Sears too.
All right, so let's move on to our next guest. And we'll get back to Terry here in a little bit. Next is my friend Brian Schreiber. He works with the Columbus Regional Airport Authority. We also share an affinity for certain beverages. We may or may not be part of a small social group of logisticians that goes and checks out local breweries every now and then. And I would tell everybody what your title is, but your title doesn't really describe what you do, at least not from my purview. So what do you do with the Airport Authority?
So yes, I do work for the Airport Authority here in town. And when you think Airport Authority, you think just airports and passengers moving in and out. And so I'm the manager for business development for air cargo at the Columbus Regional Airport Authority. But I keep on telling them one of these days, they're going to drop the air cargo part of my title, because it's really, like you said, not indicative of the full scope of what I do. So my office is at Rickenbacker. The Airport Authority operates 3 airports plus a foreign trade zone in Central Ohio. So we have actually 4 business entities. And as part of my responsibilities, air cargo doesn't happen in a vacuum. So there's, as Terry explained, logistics is part of supply chain management. So I work actively in that logistics space. And within that space, I'm the air cargo nexus, but air cargo involves everything from trucking, because nothing comes to and from the distribution center or the airplane on an airplane. It doesn't certainly get to your door on an airplane. So there's the trucking aspect, but then there's the what if a company only has 15% air and they're 85% ocean if they're an international shipping company. So they have to get all that in one place. And so what we have here in Central Ohio is really a logistics ecosystem where you have your air, your ocean, your surface transportation, your first and last mile, and we're even connected to the seaports. So we have very strong relationships with the seaports. And I kind of am at the nexus of all of that, plus the distribution activity around Rickenbacker, of which there's about 80 million square feet or so of retail distribution and fulfillment and warehousing space around the Rickenbacker Airport. That's where my office is. So I play a role as in all of that logistics ecosystem, and not just the air cargo part. As a matter of fact, this morning we were on a meeting about a potential development outside the airport that it may not use a lot of air, but it's connected to the airport. So another part of that job is I work personally, and as does the Airport Authority, with our economic development agency here in town called One Columbus. It used to be called Columbus 2020, but it's 2020. They accomplished their 2020 goals, so they needed to find a new name, which they did so last year. And One Columbus should stand the test of time. So the logistics industry in Columbus is very, very vital to the economy here. And as a matter of fact, there's an outsized amount of logistics employment in Central Ohio per capita compared to other cities. So I'm kind of in the middle of all that, and in the economic development end of working with One Columbus to bring more business into Columbus that uses the logistics assets around Rickenbacker and to create jobs is basically. So I am the air cargo business development manager, but if I stayed right in that vertical, I would be doing a very poor job.
Yeah, when I doing the little bit of research going on everybody's LinkedIn to type up my notes and everything for this, I never realized what your title was, and I'm like, well, it's not the most descriptive title for what you do. It's like logistics analyst that we see all the time in our industry. If you don't know what to call someone, you typically call them a logistics analyst. And you're right. The number of jobs here. I think the Chamber of Commerce estimates 1 in 9 of every jobs in Central Ohio is tied to logistics. So it is truly a big market. How did you end up at the airport authority? What did you do before? What's your career track been?
I started flying airplanes when I was 16, when everybody else was learning how to drive. But when there wasn't a great market for pilots, and it was a rough life for young pilots, particularly when I was at Ohio State. So I'm an Ohio State alumni, and I studied aviation management and city and regional planning at Ohio State, and got my degree. And there, I had exactly one class in logistics. I had 0 classes in supply chain. I didn't even know what that was. I had one class in logistics, and that was links and nodes, I think it was. It was more theory of travel than anything else. And I think that's where I was introduced to the term logistics, and I didn't know what that was either. I was fortunate enough to get an internship at what was then Port Columbus International Airport, is now John Glenn Columbus International, our main passenger airport, and was introduced to the airport industry and worked in the operations end of the airport industry for a number of years, until about 8 years ago, when I went over to the business development side on the air cargo. And I had worked at Rickenbacker and been involved with the air cargo handling aspect at Rickenbacker for a while before that. So it was a natural transition to go into the business development side.
So you alluded to this a little bit. And actually, as an aside, I was a marketing major at Ohio State and got turned on to the logistics program. And I was the same thing, like, oh, what's logistics? And ended up liking the classes and seeing I had a knack for it. So I can relate a little bit. So yeah, you alluded to this a little bit about how important, logistics is in Columbus, but why is cargo an important part of Rickenbacker, and more so Columbus and Central Ohio?
A lot goes to that, the fact that we are a strong logistics hub, and that is actually what our regional economic development agencies sell a lot of to companies, international and domestic, that they would like to relocate to Central Ohio. So it's important. I think we almost kind of already covered it, just because of the vast employment, the vast economic contributions. So I mentioned I'm also in charge of foreign trade zone. So we have a foreign trade zone manager that works under me, and I guess that's something I kind of glossed over. But between the foreign trade zone and the Rickenbacker Airport itself, and the foreign trade zone is bigger than the airport. It actually encompasses a service area of 25 counties in Central Ohio. So a big chunk of Ohio, we can bring a foreign trade zone operation to a company in Central Ohio. So between the two of those entities, Rickenbacker, the airport itself, and our foreign trade zone, we're responsible for 20,000 direct jobs and about $1,300 million in payroll, and $7.7 billion in economic activity in 2017 numbers. So that's kind of why cargo is important to Columbus and the Central Ohio region, really. And it's not just the industries clustered right here in Central Ohio. From Rickenbacker and from the foreign trade zone, we're serving Canada. We are serving all parts of the Eastern United States in a domestic capacity, and we're connected to all corners of the world on an international capacity. So cargo is very important to Columbus, very important.
So maybe this is a little bit of your sales pitch, but if I'm looking to bring cargo into the U.S., why wouldn't I go to Chicago? It's bigger.
And that's the problem. Bigger and more congested. So I don't know if you've ever tried to drive through Chicago, but it's I think that we went through 6 different toll roads, and it took 3 hours to go 45 miles one time when I had to go through Chicago. And that's kind of actually the logistics problem of Chicago. Certainly Chicago, New York, those are always going to be big international logistics nodes because of all of the big city connectivity. But with those gigantic operations that they are, it brings the problem of congestion into play. So the reason why we have the 80 million plus probably now square feet of distribution space around Rickenbacker Airport is because freight flows very easily. And it doesn't flow so easily in your New York. I mean, if you think about JFK Airport as another cargo airport, you got to go all the way across Manhattan, I think it is. I mean, you definitely have to go across New York City and a tractor trailer to get to the JFK Airport. You don't have to do that in Columbus. We're right onto the freeway and out to the rest of the Midwest.
Yeah, what a short couple miles up to 270, which gets you to 70 and 71. which gets you to just about anywhere in the U.S. pretty quickly. And believe it or not, we have some of the best infrastructure in the U.S. That always brings a chuckle out of the older students when I tell them that. But we do have a better infrastructure here. So how has COVID-19 changed what's going on at the airport and what you're doing? I know you were supposed to actually go to China not too long ago, and obviously that got scrapped.
Yeah, funny story, and it does involve Wuhan. We have a business interest in Wuhan and a partnership that we had a visit from there. We have a sister state relationship with Hubei province, number one. That doesn't always drive business, but it can help facilitate it. Wuhan is the capital of Hubei province in China. They came over here and had some interaction with us last summer, and I was supposed to reciprocate last fall with a group from Central Ohio, and the One Columbus group would probably be among that. And because of the trade war at the time and the trade tensions with China that were raging, you couldn't get a meeting. So we said, okay, we shelved that. We'll go to Wuhan in the spring. Well, what happened in the meantime? So yeah, I'm supposed to be in Wuhan and I would like to get there as soon as possible. And we still have a business. We actually had flights out of Wuhan last fall, serving some of the big companies here. And we were hoping to develop that business further, but the COVID situation has kind of interrupted that. We haven't lost sight of it, just a pause.
How has it changed what goes on a daily basis at Rickenbacker?
So it has increased our activity. We just came off a record all-time high month for international cargo activity in June. We had 120 aircraft come, and I'm talking big aircraft, 747, 777 freighter type aircraft that carry 100 or 140 metric tons, which we're talking a quarter to a third of a million pounds of freight on each one of them. We had 120 of those come to Rickenbacker from points across the world. These are all international cargo flights. So it really increased that activity because of a lot of the PPE and medical supplies that needed to come into the United States from overseas, but also because of the supply chain disruptions that COVID has caused. One thing about the air cargo industry specifically is 50% of the global capacity for air freight actually resides in the bellies. It is underneath the seats of passenger planes. So along with the baggage that they load into those passenger planes, and particularly the very large ones flying those international routes, you could fit 20 or 30 tons of cargo in the cargo holds of those planes to ride along. When they parked all of the passenger planes, particularly all the international routes, were shut down globally, and the great majority of them still are, automatically globally, you lost 50% of your air freight capacity. So what that did was put freighters in demand, and Rickenbacker is a freighter-centric airport. That's what we service. That's what we cater to. But then it created this other innovation, I'll call it, by the airline industry, and with regulatory approval and working very quickly. Some of these passenger airlines, and the majority of them, in fact, that flew those long-haul international routes, started at first strapping freight into the seats of those airplanes instead of passengers and netting them down. And I have some great pictures I probably wish I would have brought. And then that transitioned to, so they're flying passenger planes, but with boxes strapped in the seats. And of course, boxes in the overhead bins, all secured by netting. And then the next iteration of that, when they looked and saw that this is going to be long term, these passenger routes will probably be shut down for quite a while on the international side of the house. They started actually removing the coach class seats and building freight up and netting it down into the floor of the cabins where people used to sit. And we received 40 of those type of flights out of Dubai and out of Ho Chi Minh City over the course of the last several weeks. So it's been a very busy time, but we know it's temporary. And last month, as a matter of fact, we found out yesterday at our board committee meeting that Rickenbacker made more money, more revenue last month than CMH did, which is nothing to celebrate really, because CMH, the passenger traffic has waned. At one point, we were down a typical day at CMH, which is John Glenn Columbus International. You may see 12 or 13,000 people go through the terminal there. At the low point of COVID, we were seeing 200 and 300 people. So when I say Rickenbacker made more money than CMH last month, that's not a good thing. And we'll have to see. It's good for us, and we're very happy about it, and we're kind of leading the way for the authorities umbrella of services right now, but we would really much like the real global economy and the return to normal.
Yeah, it's kind of, some of these silver linings, they're unfortunate that they've happened, but like bringing, people's interest in our industry, that's a good thing, but you'd wish it wouldn't have quite happened quite this way. So now I know we'll probably get into this a little bit more at the end, but since you've already talked about it a little bit, being down there around Rickenbacker, what are you, looking at all the different, hundreds of facilities down there, hundreds of companies. What have you seen in general around the industry? What about, job opportunities and outlook? And is COVID-19 impacting that in a negative way or a positive way?
I mean, it's been mixed. And in the logistics industry, I think it's been positive because they've had innovate, scramble. Logistics has come to the forefront. And some of these companies are running at record levels that mirror what our record was in June. Other companies were shut down for a long time. Some of our big customers, as a matter of fact, when the virus started overseas in Asia, a lot of that retail factory production shut down before COVID even got to the United States. So huge disruption. But since we've kind of got up on plane and with this thing, and some of the factories are coming back online, it's not really. There's only opportunity in the logistics industry and for employment, and is anything from a forklift driver to an engineer designing systems to an IT person. You can't think about logistics as I'm either a truck driver or I'm throwing boxes, because every single one of these companies needs the whole variety, the whole gamut of people. And almost in any discipline and any specialty, anything that you can study or any technical specialty that you can do, you can find a job in logistics.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things when we tell people, they're kind of shocked. You're right. Everybody thinks it's driving trucks and schlepping boxes and driving forklifts. But the breadth of jobs that you can do. I always tell people, if you're an introvert like me and you like to crunch data, there's a job for you. If you're a salesperson and you like to shake hands and make deals, there's a job for you. And that's one of the nice things about the industry. And on the note of, and we'll shift to our next guest, on the note of some companies doing really, really well and others not, my next friend is Debbie Ryan from Abbott Labs, where she's the Senior Manager of North American Transportation. And now in my notes, I put this at the end, but because of what's going on today and because of the lead-in from Brian, I would be remiss to point out she was formerly a vice president at Ascena Retail, who made some big news today. I'm sure you saw.
No, I haven't.
Oh, really? Oh, we'll break it to you here today. They declared bankruptcy today.
Oh, okay.
Which I don't think was totally a shock to anybody that's been following the industry. And I'm sure COVID was kind of the final blow, unfortunately. So we can talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Debbie and I have known each other for a couple of years, for at least 4 years.
Yeah.
I don't know what her beverage of choice is, like I do with Terry and Brian, but I'm sure I will find out someday. And I'm sure we have some common ground there.
Wet is my beverage of choice. Just
what's
kidding.
that?
Wet.
Well, okay. So I'm sure everybody knows the name Abbott, but why do we? It's not a common brand name we see on things in the store, but we all know it. Why do we know the name Abbott?
Yeah, and Abbott is actually a very large employer right here in Columbus. So we have our large division headquarters. So the Abbott Labs headquartered in Chicago, but the Abbott Nutrition division is headquartered right here in Columbus. So we have 2 large office buildings over at Easton that house everything from, division finance, marketing, commercial, all of those tasks, as well as our Abbott Nutrition supply chain group. And you probably know the name subliminally if you've ever driven on 670 or ever gone up 4th. You will also see we have a very large plant downtown Columbus, and we have a large distribution center right next to it. So we've been around for a long time. Of course, this nutrition division used to be known as Ross Labs, which was founded in Columbus. I don't know when, but it's been around for quite a long time. So anyway, and Abbott has been in the news quite a bit through the COVID crisis. We have 5 total COVID tests that are under development and have been approved by the FDA for emergency use only. So they don't have their final FDA approval, but they're approved for emergency use. And we also have 2 antibody tests, again, that are approved for emergency use only, but very active in developing testing to support COVID. So a lot of our name in the press lately for those reasons.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I think there was even a testing kit in the Rose Garden with the president on one afternoon, I think.
Yes, yeah, there was a week there where our name was brought up almost every day in those briefings. So yeah, that was it was great to to get that publicity, but at the end of the day, we are really a company that's all about living your best life, right? And it's very interesting to work for a company that is so devoted to and invested in better health for everyone, period.
Yeah. And before we get too distracted, talking about COVID and Abbott, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the supply chain management field.
Yeah, and if I think of logistics and supply chain, I have an origin story that starts at a very young age, like Terry. So I'm the oldest of 4 very active girls, and my logistics career started the day I got my driver's license. And my parents said, "Good, your sisters are at the pool, and your other sister needs to be picked up at dance class." So my goal was to make the most efficient route to go pick up my sisters and drop them off at home, and maybe squeeze in a few extra moments before mom expected us home to run through the Dairy Queen or something like that. So anyway, but all kidding aside, I started out a little bit of an accidental logistician. I went to Miami University and studied international studies there, and thought of a career in government service or something like that. Got out of college and things weren't developing right away, and I ended up finding a job at Roadway Express, who had a great management trainee program, and I decided to try it for a year, and if I hated it, I could always quit and start something new, and I just kind of got hooked. And I've been a transportation professional my whole career. So I started out from LTL trucking. I went to steamship and 3PL for a while, and I've been on what we call the customer side of the business since 1999, working primarily for retail, in big box retail with Kmart for a little while, specialty retail at Warner Brothers studio stores, working for Value City department stores, and the Retail Ventures chain brought me back to Columbus. And as you mentioned, I was at Ascena for the last 10 years. I've been with Abbott for about 18 months now. So this was the only corner of the supply chain field, consumer products, that I hadn't really investigated, and it's been so interesting to be not just kind of in a transportation or a logistics silo, but also heavily involved with the manufacturing of our products. The umbrella of my job also encompasses things like raw materials deliveries to our plants across the country. As everything from that to getting product in the hands of the end consumer, whether that's a doctor's office or a shelf at Walmart or something like that. So anyway, always lots of challenges, and transportation itself is quite cyclical, and maybe I just have a short attention span, but I like all of the constant change and new challenges.
That's one of the nice things about our industry. You can be a specialist and really dig down into an area and do the same thing your entire career, or you can be a generalist and try out all the different sides and be equally successful at both. I'm kind of the same way as you. I've been in retail, I've been in manufacturing, I've jumped around a lot. So since you brought up the manufacturing side, how has COVID-19 impacted Abbott's manufacturing, and can can you even go into just manufacturing in general? What kind of a disruption this has been for that industry?
Yeah, and I think if you can envision all of the empty shelves that we saw in March and April, right? So, or if you think of the supply chain as just sort of a pipe full of product moving from origin to destination, right? And what we like things to do is kind of flow at about the same pace, right? Well, what happens when a big hole is carved out in those shelves at the end? It creates, at the end of the supply chain, it creates this bubble kind of moving through supply chains. And supply chains don't like bubbles. So, it causes a lot of extra expense and extra work and things like that. So, we had to respond very quickly to a lot of the pantry loading that went on. And, we have products like Pedialyte and Ensure that help people recover from illness. So those were some of the hardest hit products when the shelves were cleared out. So, that rapid pull forward of product, that rapid increase in demand at the end of the supply chain, there were repercussions all the way up the supply chain, right? We had to start making product, and it caused a spike in demand for our raw materials like milk protein powder and flavorings and packaging and corrugated, right? So that the dominoes just keep rolling over, all the way upstream to all of our raw materials and things like that. So, supply chain management as an industry often focuses on being very lean. We want to squeeze out all of the costs. We want to have the lowest production costs. We want to keep inventories of everything, from raw materials to finished goods. We want to keep them, those inventories, as low as possible. We want to move everything just in time. But I think, as COVID showed us, supply chains have to be resilient too. They have to be able to bounce back quickly. So if you get that bubble, there's a way to, kind of fill the bubble back in very, very quickly and get things back to that nice, smooth supply chain. So, and I think, consumer supply chains of every type in the U.S. Are hearing that word resiliency a lot more. And, how do we trying to figure out the best ways to make supply chains lean, but also resilient?
So I'm going to put you on the spot. Is there an item or a product or a raw material that is unusual right now that you can't get, that's kind of a surprise, that's impacted manufacturing at all? Like aluminum cans. While you're thinking, aluminum cans are kind of short right now.
Yeah.
The brewing industry started to can things here within the last 2 or 3 years. It's become hot. Well, now everybody's at home, so we're buying more products to consume at home, which means we're buying more soda and beer and wine and can and whatnot. So aluminum cans are in a shortage right now, which I think nobody really expected to happen. Have you run across anything like that at Abbott, where it's been an unusual item stocked out or an inventory that's drained quickly?
Jeremy, I know also some of our students have been commenting here in the comment section about all the things that they've noticed that have been missing on the shelves in the stores, such as, the toilet paper, hand sanitizers. Let's see what else came up. Someone said flour and being able to make bread, that they've never seen stuff like that before.
Yeah.
And we do have questions when you're ready for that too, but I just wanted to throw that in there that everyone's chiming in.
People are baking at home. So yeah, that's why flour's been hard to get. People are buying pools and entertainment systems. So yeah, all kinds of interesting things. And so like, I don't drink this, but caffeine-free Diet Mountain Dew. I mean, not too many people drink it. Pepsi has shifted to Pepsi and Mountain Dew because it's flying off the shelves, so they have to dial back. So if you are a consumer of an unusual product, you may think, well, why is that in short supply? Nobody drinks that. They're not making it because nobody drinks it. So it's definitely interesting. So since we've alluded to Ascena a little bit, and we're talking about retail and stockouts, retail's been changing because of just in general, people ordering things at home. So retail was already starting to see some interesting trends. Can you talk about that a little bit from the Ascena side of things, and maybe how COVID-19 has made that switch happen even faster?
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the name Ascena, the brands include Justice, Lane Bryant, the now defunct Dress Barn, Ann Taylor Loft, Maurice's, and Catherine's. I think we have certainly seen a major shift into e-commerce, and because it has been so prolonged, I think every day that goes by, e-commerce is becoming more entrenched, and people are saying to themselves, why do I need to go to a store, right? I think it's having just a huge impact on brick and mortar. I think this is just Debbie Ryan talking. I think shopping is going to be entertainment in the future, right? Because something that you don't really need to do, something you want to do for that tactile experience or something like that. But I think e-commerce is going to continue. The rate of growth of e-commerce is going to continue to increase. And think about the economy of Columbus is pretty heavily reliant on retail and distribution and fulfillment services associated with retail. I looked online last night because I know we might be talking about this today, but a list of bankruptcies since COVID started, so since March: Sur La Table, New York and Company, Stage Stores, JCPenney, J. Crew, Brooks Brothers, Neiman Marcus, Tuesday Morning, GNC, Old Time Pottery, and now add Ascena to that list.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's amazing. There's a crater just blown in retail, and then there's going to be a domino effect, right? Because now these companies, all of the suppliers to these companies are now only going to get pennies on the dollar on their outstanding debts, right? Think of all the factories, not just in China, but in Vietnam and Bangladesh and Italy and India and whatever. They're now all going to get pennies on the dollar on the debts of all of these companies. But think about all logistics companies too. Think about all the trucking companies and 3PLs, fulfillment centers, all of those guys that are also going to get pennies on the dollar from the debt of all these retailers. I think it's just going to, the wave is just going to ripple out. My specialty is transportation and trucking. Trucking was already having a really rough couple of years because of the slowing economic activity. So we were already seeing kind of record low rates, record high capacity in the marketplace, which was depressing rates. And a lot of these companies had laid off workers because of COVID, because a lot of the non-essential goods being pulled off the roads and rails and out of the air, and and now they're going to get hit with these waves of bankruptcies that are just going to further impact their revenues, and they have a lot of other issues going on too, like insurance rates going sky high because of record. They call them nuclear awards in lawsuits and things like that. So, we could start to see some, trucking companies and 3PLs and things like that teetering, and there has been merger and acquisition going on in the industry. We may see that accelerate as well, but kind of a grim outlook for retailers.
Yeah, the term retail apocalypse has been thrown out a lot, but if you look, and this might be a good time to bring both Brian and Terry back in, and we'll kind of talk about the future of SCM. I read a really good article where the gentleman was saying it's not necessarily a retail apocalypse. It's just a shifting. It's a changing. One of the questions in the chat was, are malls going to die? Malls have been kind of slowly dying for some time. City center, downtown, gone. A lot of them are being looked at right now for industrial type things, or maybe small distribution centers and things like that. So I think we're seeing a shifting. It's not necessarily dying. It's just changing.
Okay.
People aren't going into the stores to buy stuff as much, but then other retailers are booming. So it's definitely a change. So let's talk about, so we've painted a picture of lots of opportunity and lots of jobs, but yet because of COVID-19, things are kind of teetering. We'll go back to Terry. What are some of the short-term impacts that we're seeing from careers, and what do you think that might have? What positive impacts do you think that might have long-term for those of us in the industry? That's kind of a generic question, but.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think it really does, in many ways, kind of stem from the point you were just making, that we are seeing a really interesting shift in the retail space where, again, we're shopping more online, as Debbie was mentioning, and we are seeing more and more of these bankruptcies, unfortunately, when it comes to the traditional brick and mortar retailers. And so someone asked the question, will malls die? That's been a big conversation point. And to the point that Debbie made a moment ago, nowadays, when you think about brick and mortar stores, to be honest, you don't necessarily have to go there. You have to want to go. And so more of the retailers have been moving to experiential kind of things within their stores, so that going to retail stores is not just about shopping, but it's also about an experience in the process. Well, I bring all that up as a backdrop because your question is, kind of how has this pivoting affected the industry? So I think now more than ever, we're seeing more and more jobs that are being advertised for supply chain related work. I hear it on the radio. I see it printed. We are in an industry that has seemingly been able to thrive with others, maybe because more and more we're seeing more of an emphasis on just the essential nature of the work that we do within supply chain and logistics. But it's different work, right? So we're seeing more of a focus on, working, distribution center operations. We're seeing more, emphasis on delivery work. And even more even for those that go the college route, more work in different industries, focusing on the online retail space, which is emerging a lot more. And so I think what we're seeing is just some interesting shifts, just as well as retail has shifted. It has now shifted the kind of logistics work that is required in order to manage the new reality of retail. And that has opened up a lot of new job opportunities, it seems, in some really interesting pockets and areas within the industry. As I mentioned, just the number of people that have started their own businesses and getting into contract work with companies like an Amazon to do delivery work, or the folks that have moved from maybe a job in the manufacturing and have migrated to more distribution center and warehouse type of employment opportunities. And again, more and more young people coming to colleges interested in logistics and supply chain, because we're seeing more and more of a focus on how important this industry is. So it's been interesting to see kind of how the shifts that we've been referring to are also starting to shift the needs that we have within logistics, and the kinds of jobs that are now more available than they were before.
Yeah,
Hey,
go
Jeremy?
ahead, Julie.
Oh, yeah. You guys just kind of are really talking to one of our students' questions, which is, where does Columbus fall as far as one of the best cities for supply chain jobs? And then also, how can they find more information, or more, besides the majors here at Columbus State, training in supply chain management?
Brian, I'm going to throw that question to you. As one that travels and has to deal with competition from other cities, where does Columbus rank, in your opinion, when it comes to supply chain jobs and us being a hub?
So I think in the comment that Terry made about more and more students coming in being interested in supply chain is a good thing for Columbus, because I would say, in my estimation, and Terry and Deb could confirm this, we didn't have enough qualified supply chain students coming out of college. We didn't have enough qualified supply chain people in Columbus, particularly in some of the air cargo areas that I work in. The talent, the knowledge was in short supply. So I would often get requests from air freight forwarders, which are transportation companies that actually move the freight around, do customs brokerage work and stuff like that. And airlines, hey, can you find me a person for this? Can you find me a person for that? And some of these, one airline in particular, they enticed somebody to come up and relocate here from Houston because they needed a key position. This was a very young person, not too long out of college, and it was already making a career in Houston, and they got him to move to Columbus because they needed to fill the position with his specialty. So I would say the outlook for jobs is very good if you're coming into the supply chain area, and I would defer to the wisdom of Deb, who's been hiring people on that as well.
From the other cities standpoint, it kind of depends on what's there. Geographically, we're landlocked, but we're also kind of the epicenter of all the U.S. population. So we're in a good spot. Whereas Fargo, North Dakota is hard to get to. So obviously it's not a logistics hub. The Port of San Diego and the Port of Los Angeles and some of those other ports obviously are big logistics hubs because they're getting a lot of international cargo in. Terry, from your research and what you teach in class, are there any other cities that compete with Columbus that are similar to us, that are landlocked, that are also logistics hubs?
So the landlocked is maybe, so I immediately started to think of, other logistics hubs like Memphis, but, I don't know that they're right along the Mississippi. Of course, Memphis is a city that we typically think of. Louisville, Kentucky, because of the big UPS hub there. Louisville. I think that I think there are several. It kind of depends on kind of what's going on, around them. But in this area of the country, I think, of course, we're thinking of your Louisville, Kentucky's, your Memphis. Of course, we may mention earlier of Chicago, just because it's such a global, for a lot of things. But those are the ones that immediately come to mind.
Yeah, and just the fact that L Brands was established here, I think helped as well. We're a fashion hub. I mean, if you look out, online and stay up with the news, there's a lot of people in fashion that are relocating to Columbus because they don't need to be in LA, they don't need to be in New York, and here they can be kind of centralized. So we are slowly building ourselves as a fashion hub. And Julie, I think the second question was, how do people get training? This is one way, coming to things like this. There's a lot of networking that happens in Columbus. All of us on this call have met through networking and conferences. Some of them are paid, but some of them are free. I would say network with those of us that are on this call. If you want to connect to me through LinkedIn, send me a note on LinkedIn and connect with me. That's perfectly fine. I post stuff all the time. And just, picking up tidbits here and there is probably the best way to learn. Learning in class is one thing, but some of the textbooks they're not always up to date. So hearing the current events and seeing what's going on day to day is really important. Anybody in the panel want to weigh in on that?
Hey, Jeremy, it's Brian.
Yeah.
I think it was Ibrahima's question in addition that you were addressing about, in addition to the college, where can you find training seminars?
Yeah.
I believe we're all 3 or 4 involved in what's called CSCMP, and I believe they have maybe a student affiliation for that. If you wanted to speak to what that program is, it is a supply chain management professional organization, and they do a lot of training.
Yeah, there's professional industry or industry associations. So that's Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals. They do have student rates. They have meetings on a regular basis here. There's the Warehouse Education and Research Council. They don't have a local chapter, but they do, just based on the name, they do education. There's the Material Handling Institute. They put on great big huge conferences every year that are actually free. Industry organizations, there's trade magazines, there's a lot of additional stuff out there. where you can pick up this information just by being online on a daily basis. So,
Jeremy, I would also add, just not to discount some of the some of the kind of the entry level work that typically kind of the stuff that we see as kind of just like, oh, I don't have any experience, I just work in a distribution center. It's like, no, that's great experience, right? I've had students that are like, well, I don't have any experience, I just work at UPS. And I'm like, no, working at UPS is phenomenal experience. I worked at UPS before, I worked in the distribution center before for Sears. So I think it is, not only getting more of this professional level conversation, but also not discounting the wonderful opportunities that are out there to do some of the work in the trenches. But it's a great way to start. I cannot speak enough about how important that kind of work is, to know what's really happening within the depths of logistics infrastructures and in supply chains. And so I would say to young people that might have interest in supply chain, that are just starting in college, and as opposed to working a part-time job where you might be working at a local restaurant, or or a barista at a Starbucks, why not go to DHL supply chain and work in one of their facilities, learn some of the depths of the work, and really getting into what's happening within these facilities, that eventually you'll be running and managing, and then eventually be some chief supply chain officer. But you're such a better chief supply chain officer of a big multinational corporation if you know, and you started and you got your hands dirty in the guts of organization. So I would just say, as another way, it's not a formal training through a seminar, but it's some of the best training that you can get to work part-time in some of these facilities and just learn by doing some of the grunt work, if you will, within supply chain.
I always go ahead, Debbie.
You might have mentioned this earlier, but I think this is one industry where there is a lot of mobility, horizontally as well as vertically. And you could start as a forklift driver, right? And you may end up as a shift supervisor or a distribution center manager or something. I started out as a dispatcher at Roadway Express, and at one point I was managing international logistics for a 3PL with J. Crew and things like, so you can, there's a lot of ways to get experience in the industry, and there's a lot of mobility, and those entry level jobs, right? They could be forklift driver or case handler, or and there are entry level jobs that might be like on the retail side, that might be a merchandise planner, and you're going to find out about the where the product comes from and how much you send to where and why, and things like that. And then you could easily migrate over to, some type of job in planning those logistics. So my advice is just jump in, find some place and just jump in and start learning, and, move around till you find something you like.
The advice I always give everybody is learn inventory. If you work at McDonald's, they have to do an inventory, help count inventory, volunteer for inventory control teams. I've always told people that if you understand how inventory works within a facility, and you can research problems and figure out where inventory broke down, you will understand the entire business. Because you have to do the research, you have to understand how the trucks are unloaded, how it's counted on the dock, how it's put away, how it's picked, how it gets shipped out, how it gets recounted, retagged. And if you understand that process, and you know how a product comes in the door and goes all the way through till it goes out the door, you can work in any department. Mm-hmm. So, Julie, or anybody that's monitoring the chat, is there any other questions we can get to?
Yes. So we just had a question pop up about what advice might you give to career changers with supply chain management as a second career?
I will start that by saying we estimate 70% of Columbus State students are working adults, and I would say half of those are well into their first career and wanting to advance or wanting to change careers. I've had students as old as late 40s, early 50s, late 50s that are in an industry that's dying and needing a change. I had one student that was selling backup tape. He was the VP at a company that sold backup data tapes, which obviously they knew was dying. and he was sales all his life, but he wanted to get into logistics.
Mhm.
So the industry is a very forgiving one and always looks for people that have outside experience, because if you have some experience in an industry at all, you can transition over into logistics and use what you've learned in that other industry. So, Debbie, you
I would agree.
want to add to that? Anybody?
Yeah, I would just say that, supply chain as a whole and logistics, we are a community of people that in many ways were converted. So, we are a community of persons who went through a conversion. I think a few of us even talked about some of our conversions earlier on. I mean, when I first went to college, I didn't go to college to major in logistics or
Right.
supply chain. I didn't even know that existed, right? So I think more and more those conversions are happening earlier in life as we see more of these programmings develop. But the majority of us were either majoring in something else, or had intentions to major in something else, or graduated in something else and were eventually converted into the community. And so we are a community of persons that have been converted. And for some people, it takes a little while before that conversion takes place. So yeah, if this is another career, come on over. As you mentioned, Jeremy, there's so many places. And one thing about logistics, which I think is interesting, is that, all companies in some way, shape, or form are managing some aspects of supply chain and logistics. And so the reality is that even if you had experience in another industry, within that industry, I guarantee you that there are some folks that are doing some logistics somewhere. So, you have the person that may have been working in pharma but want to get into logistics, but it's like, well, you can do logistics within pharma, right? Or the person that has been in, say, for example, in the restaurant industry, but wants to come into logistics, but it's like, yeah, logistics is really prevalent within the restaurant industry. So I do think that there are some of those ways to even maybe pivot within that first industry of that first career to get into the logistics side of that industry for the second career, if you will. So just
Yeah, I
a
think
couple of thoughts.
one of the industries that I don't think people realize there's such a huge overlap between the two is manufacturing and supply chain.
Yeah.
I've always jokingly said that manufacturing is basically just logistics with a little bit of production mixed in. You're moving stuff constantly.
Yeah.
I mean, think about a
Yeah.
manufacturing facility. It's things that are moving, and going back to what Terry said in his initial part, logistics is the physical movement of goods. So, and if you think about, Honda, most of that business is moving something somewhere. So yeah, there's a really good overlap. If you've got any manufacturing experience at all, you're going to rock in logistics because you kind of already understand what's going on.
Yeah.
So kind of a question for the panel. How do you see technology impacting our career field? Specifically regarding careers, and with everything going on right now, obviously automation is going to be looked at heavier. How do you see technology impacting our career field?
I'll go. I think it has been having a large impact for quite a while, and I think we're going to, just as you mentioned, start to see more robotics and things like that. We're just going to continue to try and lower costs, increase service with the use of those kind of things. In the sort of the transportation end of this pool, technology has been in use for a long time in terms of helping with dispatches and tracking and statuses and things like that. And a new area of transportation is digital load boards and digital routing. So, to kind of take a little bit more of the manual or human interaction piece out of it, but it's having another effect as well, and actually increasing capacity. It's increasing the efficiency of our nationwide truck fleet. So those are a couple of areas that I'm familiar with.
Terry, what about automation in the last mile? When are we going to start getting Donatos delivered via drone to our houses?
Well, I mean, so drone delivery is a reality. It's something that's already happening in other areas of the world. I think that's it's always. I think it'll still be a while before we see drone delivery here in the U.S., especially in urban areas. I do think that in rural communities, we're going to see much more of a likelihood that drone delivery will be a reality much sooner in some remote areas of this country where it actually will be cheaper and even better service be deploy a drone to make some of those deliveries. There are companies that are already looking at this um, when something is driving on its own. I'm losing my words right there. Autonomous.
Autonomous.
These
Autonomous,
autonomous, yeah, these autonomous robots and things that are going to be delivering products. So I think we're going to see some interesting developments. Am I frozen there? No, okay. Some interesting developments as it relates to technology in the last mile. I think the bigger conversation is going to be, how we. I mean, the business case for the use of those technologies are there. It's really going to be a function of how we integrate those technologies with people and how to manage that process most effectively. What we're seeing right now, based on some work that we're doing at OSU, is that a lot of companies are investing in things like artificial intelligence technologies to help and assist in managing their supply chains, but yet the people that are managing those supply chains are not really relying on the AI-based technologies as much as those companies would like. So you got the investment in the technology, but yet the people aren't really utilizing the technology to its full capability. So I think, it's not just that as soon as you put the technology in, everything is going to change. There's still a lot of retraining and people issues that are going to be necessary in order for those technologies to really have that major impact that everybody is predicting. So we'll watch and wait. But that's one of the cool things about this space, is that for persons who are really interested in technology, supply chain is an area where there's a lot of technology, and it's technology for a use, right? It's not just technology for the sake of with the technology, but it's technology to support better execution of getting product to market. So therefore, we may not have to wait as long for things like hand sanitizer and toilet paper with the use of some really good technologies, right?
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure Debbie can attest to this, drivers are in high demand. There's about 80 to 90,000 short in the U.S. right now. And retail places like Amazon wanting to hire for peak season, they can't hire all the people that they want to hire. And that's where automation comes in and solves those problems. And that leads to more tech jobs, people that can understand that technology. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So I think I know we were scheduled at 2:30. We've got a few minutes left. I see people dropping off probably because they've got some other things. So I'm gonna go ahead and oh yeah, go ahead, Debbie.
Oh, I was just going to say, this is
Julie.
Julie Collette, just popping in to say we do have another student question.
Oh, okay.
If you'd like to take one more.
Sure.
Okay, wonderful. The students are wondering, what kind of opportunities are there out there for Columbus State students that major in supply chain management or logistic engineering technology? And is that fairly compatible, and can they get into those fields like OSU students?
I can answer that. I had a phone call from a friend of mine this morning who's looking for an operations manager. It's for a small company, and that title usually indicates a higher paying job. And he's like, we can't afford to pay someone $80,000. We think we need someone that's got a little bit of experience. Do you have anybody in mind? And that's kind of where the Columbus State student fits in. If you've got some good experience, a couple years at an entry level job with a 2-year degree or working on your 2-year degree, a company is going to snatch you up because you have some experience. Now, Terry being at OSU and Brian and I being OSU grads, I can say when I came out, I had a little tiny bit of experience, but not much. I didn't pull down a huge salary. But some of my friends that had been working for a couple of years got jobs right away. So it kind of all depends, but there's definitely opportunity out there, especially if you work your way through college, because you're obviously picking up experience. And I'll turn that question back over to the panel too. Does anybody want to weigh in on that?
I would just say that I think that, one of the things about this career in this space is just that there are opportunities for all types of backgrounds, right? So, yeah, there are those companies that are for those 4-year college graduates out of one of these top supply chain schools. But there are also companies that are looking for persons that might come from a smaller program or may not have the 4-year degree to be able to address some needs in another area of that operation. And then they're going to also at the same time be looking for persons who have, just a high school education in order to fulfill other needs. And they all work together. So I think, and eventually they'll be looking for somebody who's got a PhD, right? So I think ultimately that's one of the cool things about supply chain as a community is that we really do touch all types. It's not a community like, maybe finance where, you have to have those degrees in order to get into those companies and work in those areas. Whereas in supply chain, I mean, we really touch, all levels of education from high school education all the way through to PhD, and we all have our place, right? And I think that's the thing. We all have our place where we fit and we bring value to those processes. So I think there are tons of opportunities and everyone has their place where they fit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And, I will tell you from, experience interviewing people, if you are paying for your own education, that goes a long way with employers because that means you are owning your career, you're owning your future, you are responsible, you're accountable. Those are all great qualities that employers like to hire for. So, and I would say, again, don't rule out certain types of jobs because you could start as a forklift operator, or you could get in somewhere, as a case handler or something like that. That is not going to limit you in any way. In this particular industry, it's all lots of mobility.
I've always advised students take the job that isn't as attractive, that second shift or weekend shift supervisor job. Get your foot in the door, and if you do a good job, you'll eventually get to where you want to go. You may have to pay the dues for a little bit, but yeah, take that job that doesn't look as fun and as attractive. You're gonna excel faster in a situation like that. So
and Jeremy, I'll also say this because again, I'm on faculty at OSU, and I know you guys have OSU degrees, but there are some areas and there are some pockets where I would say that Columbus State students will run circles around OSU students, and it is in some of those areas of that just it's just a different model, and it's and I think that and that model is going to be really, really impactful for some areas within supply chain where maybe a student that comes from OSU might not be a good fit there, right? And so to your point, Debbie, about some of the grit and the stick-to-itiveness of of starting a second career and taking responsibility and working day and taking school at night, all of those things suggests grit. It suggests leadership and ownership, and those are just things, to be honest with you, that sometimes a 4-year student at an OSU might not have the ability to exemplify, whereas at Columbus State it might be very much more apparent. And if I'm working for a company like Abbott and I'm looking for someone that maybe has a little bit more of that grit, I might say, hey, I'm going to choose this student over that one because I can see that they have a story that shows me that they're going to get into the trenches and really do really great work. So I think we all have our place.
Oh yeah. Yep. Okay. Well, I think that was a great way to wrap everything up. And before I do that, I would like to point out we did talk manufacturing a bit. I already talked about that huge overlap between the two. So for those of you that are left, keep your eyes and ears open. We're working on an upcoming webinar talking about manufacturing and how COVID-19 has impacted it specifically. That will be a partnership with the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, or MEP. If you're not familiar with that, that's a statewide program that partners regional companies, helps Ohio manufacturers increase sales, creates jobs, and generate cost savings through technological innovation, workforce training, and improved management practices. Columbus State and Ohio State are both partners in the MEP program and happy to be a participant. So you're going to receive some information after the session. It's also in the chat with some surveys. some more information on the MEP, and most importantly, there's going to be a survey about this. We'd like your feedback so we can make these better as we go on. Lastly, a huge thank you to all that were behind the scenes. An even bigger thank you to Debbie, Brian, Terry, and a special thanks to all of you that stuck with us today and paid attention and asked questions and watched our fun chat. So thanks again to everybody, and have a good afternoon. Bye. Thank you.